A lot of you do know me. We've been around together now for many, many years. Going on almost 10 years, I think, since we started PCBSD, so hard to believe sometimes. But today we're going to be talking about some of the recent developments where we're rebranding into TrueOS, which some of you have heard of in the past, but we're going to go through and talk a little about that. And of course, I like to be interactive, so if you have questions trying to get my attention, I'll be happy to try and answer anything I can. So, of course, after 10 plus years of PCBSD, rebranding is kind of, thank you, an important step. So a lot of things that people ask is, why? I mean, you don't just do a rebrand for no reason. What's actually changed under the hood to prompt such a radical move? Will PCBSD users be left in the dust, or will they be able to upgrade to the new TrueOS? So we're going to go through first of all the reasoning behind the name change. So first of all, alphabet soup. So this isn't actually something we just thought of a couple months ago. This has come up for years now at this point, right? PCBSD, that's a lot of letters. And if you're new to the community, you don't even know what BSD stands for. You're like, wait, PCBSD, what is all this, right? And I think for 7 years, even my parents couldn't remember what it was, right? It's a lot to remember, especially if you're new. But another thing that was really prompting this also was the term PC. I mean, what does that mean nowadays in 2016? And does that adequately reflect what we're doing with the project? Because there's a lot of things we've done on the side, which, I don't know, maybe that's not so much PC-ish anymore. So, of course, also a lot has changed internally with the release process. PCBSD and TrueOS don't necessarily follow the same release model, which we're going to get to in just a moment. So next question. What changed internally? So of course the entire model's undergone an overhaul. Historically, PCBSD, if you've been following us for any time in the past 10 years, you've noticed we've tried to track FreeBSD pretty closely. Specifically, we've tracked the release branch of FreeBSD. So there was a couple times, actually the one time people got mad at me because we released our release slightly before you guys announced FreeBSD release, and that stepped on some toes. I apologize, but we tried not to do that again. But typically we would push our release out within 24 hours of FreeBSD's release going public, which has been fine. But something happened. In late 2015, we started doing current images, which was kind of a new thing for us, rolling on current. That's scary, right? But we did our first month of that images, and all of a sudden we're getting all this traction on them. Thank you, right, Michael? We're getting all this traction on the mailing lists and on the forums, and all of a sudden people were excited about the project. Even people who had maybe gone and had left at some point were starting to come back like, oh, this is kind of neat. I can run a current image. And what we found was that very quickly became the driving factor in the user adoption and in a lot of the active development. So with TrueOS, we've just decided to make this formal, and we've now fully embraced current, and we are now moving to a rolling release model, which is typically updated bi-monthly. So again, maybe that's too frequent for some of you, but for us, we feel like that's about the right amount, and we've been doing this now for about 6 months and been pretty happy with it. So of course the question people ask is, why the shift to a rolling release model? Again, a big difference between releasing twice a year to trying to do something every couple weeks now. So the biggest one is allowing more modern hardware to be used in a timely fashion. So for example, these X1 Carbons I have, 11.0 is obsolete for me. Like even the wireless wasn't working on it properly. I needed current. And if you go to the store and you want to have any reasonable chance of something working off the shelf, current is where you got to be. That's just a fact of life. It allows users and our developers access to much more cutting-edge features. When Adrian pushes his new wireless stack, I get people immediately bugging me, like, why don't you have that? Why don't you have that? And it really sucked for the last 10 years to have to tell them, oh, wait 6 months. Heck, wait 2 years if it's not going to get backported to stable. That was just a buzzkill. And I got sick of that. And we would cheat and backport stuff internally, but it didn't work right. And it was a mess. It was time to make this shift. Also, it fills a really important usability gap of current for binary-only users. So, this may come as a shock to some of you guys, but there's a lot of folks out there who aren't kernel developers, world hackers, or ports guys who want to run current. They don't know how to do a build world. They don't know how to do an install world, but they troll on the mailing lists or they read the forums and they're like, oh, I saw some new cool Beehive feature got added. I would love to play with that. But they don't have maybe the technical acumen to go ahead and do that themselves. Michael Dexter, you've been good about promoting this, but you know, sometimes it's hard for people to grab patches and figure out how to roll that in on their own.
Or to give a talk and a demo with Beehive with like Xorg and a pretty picture.
Yes, exactly. That's tough for some folks. So we're hoping we can kind of step into the gap there and provide a new service, if you will, for the general FreeBSD community. So hopefully you guys can now point some of these less technical folks who maybe want to kind of become more technical and want to track FreeBSD a little closer in a easier to use manner for them. So another question we get asked is, so what actually changed to allow you to do a rolling release? So the first thing that happened was about a mid-2016, so only 6 months ago, we started shifting over to package base. This was before 11.0 came out, and there was still a lot of discussion on whether it was going to make it in for 11 or not. And I think it was at BSDCan where you guys ultimately decided that we're going to hold off on that on the FreeBSD side of things. Well, about that point, we had already started shifting over, and we felt like, hey, it's working well enough for what we need, and we're happy to help sand off the rough edges. And we knew we were going to be going to this new TrueOS thing soon anyway. So we felt like this is a good place for us to be good community citizens and help bite the bullet, and so to speak, for the FreeBSD project. We're going to help you guys find issues and kind of we'll bleed on this a little bit for you. And I think it's worked out pretty well. So of course the FreeBSD update, which was great when you're running 10.3 or 10.1 or 10.2, was just too disruptive to the workflow for binary updating on current. I mean, heck, I had enough struggles with it just running on release, but trying to get it to sometimes drop in new files, and there's files with weird new characters in it and stuff. It tipped over a lot more than it should have. So we knew we were going to have to jettison that, and package base was the logical choice. And then this, of course, coupled with our pretty much exclusive use of ZFS for updating, made it a lot safer and easier for us to do this. We felt like we weren't taking as big a risk by possibly bricking systems because, you know, if worst comes to worst, we have a boot environment you can roll back, and then we can figure out what went wrong. So a question we get asked is, so how does TrueOS handle binary updating? So PCBSD originally started using a ZFS plus boot environment several years back. I know Jordan mentioned boot environments. I mean, if you've been around any kind of BSD conference in the last couple of years, you've heard that term thrown a lot. And we've been using it since pretty much day one on FreeBSD. That's been a big deal for us. So on PCBSD, updates were performed all as background tasks into a new boot environment. So an update would get staged, it would get prepared, and then it would be flagged as this is my new boot environment to boot into. So TrueOS kind of takes this idea and expands upon it with a couple key differences to solve some problems we ran into. So in TrueOS, updating has actually been broken down into two distinct stages. So background updating actually just involves downloading packages only, doing verification of checksums, and then it pretty much stops at that point. A Sentinel file is created and the UI and user are notified that, hey, updates have been staged, we are ready to do updating at your convenience. At shutdown time, however, Init actually kicks off a second stage, which then actually performs the update and creates the new boot environment, which means the system's no longer in an interactive phase, so we can not worry about the system changing while we're trying to do updates. So Kirk, actually you prompted this in many ways, because when we shipped you that box, I think at one point you had staged an update and hadn't rebooted in, I don't know, days, and then you were like, oh, I rebooted and I lost all my Etsy changes, right? And so we puzzled that out, like, oh, that is a problem. How do we solve that? And so this was the most elegant solution we could come up with, was try and only actually take that snapshot and create that boot environment at a point where we know you're not making changes to Etsy, you're not making changes that could be lost upon reboot. So another thing that was very important to us was making the update manager self-updating. So being on a rolling release is a little bit scary. You know, new package NG can drop into the tree at any point. Right? Things can happen, updates can go sideways, and sometimes your old update code from 3 months ago that's on your system you haven't updated in a while may not know how to cope with new things that have just landed on the remote side. So one big thing we had to do is make the updater self-updating. So when you actually kick off an update, it always is checking out the most current code and using that to start doing update changes. This has actually been really helpful, because if an update does go sideways, we can have somebody send us the logs, we can do our diagnosis, and then we can patch the updater on the fly, and all the user has to do is just click the button to do the update again. It just starts working. Like, they didn't have to go fetch a patch or go to GitHub and rebuild anything. Like, it's just kind of made it super easy for everyone to use. Another thing we've been able to do is provide options in the user interface to allow you to skip pending updates if it's not convenient. So for example, on the laptop here, I could be on the airplane and maybe a whole bunch of updates have staged, and I'm like, I have 2% of battery life, and I'm not going to sit here and let it fail while it's trying to update at the shutdown procedure. So the UI will prompt you and say, okay, if you want to skip this, we can do it some other time. No big deal, it's staged, you can come back to it when you want. And of course, like I said, should an update go sideways, the BE never actually gets made active, but the error log is kept, and that helps us do some forensics and figure out exactly what tipped over. So of course, being on current introduces some other interesting challenges, such as ABI changes. That's definitely been an issue for us, and we've had to figure out how to deal with that. So of course, we had to do some additional tooling and put some seatbelts in place to deal with this challenge. But in particular, during the package upgrade phase, we've had to monitor for incoming ABI changes in packages, and then this in turn will do some stuff within our update manager to trigger full package updates. So in other words, if you're doing an update and really only 10 packages have had their versions bumped, but they were built on a newer ABI, new world, new kernel, we do need to go back and make sure we update your other packages as well, so you have a happy experience the next time you reboot. Another thing we had to do is, due to the nature of package, it's possible you could be running on a 3-month-old build and you go to the command line, type in package install Firefox, right? Well, what if the Firefox on the remote has, again, a much newer ABI than the one locally? Well, that presented some problems, because it would go ahead and happily say, let me fetch that package from remote and I'll install it, and then when you go run it, ABI has changed and it doesn't function. The creative method we came up with that was inserting a sanity check, which actually verifies that the ABI on the remote side matches the local, and then will prompt you to go ahead and do an update first before you start doing package installations. So another thing we get asked is, well, how much has TrueOS now diverged from FreeBSD? Some people have that concern. So first of all, I just wanted to say, in some ways, it's actually grown closer since the PCBSD days. The biggest one is we finally have moved back from Grub over to the BSD bootloader, which has been awesome. It's one of those things I've wanted to do for years. Grub we had to use for a while to prove that this whole crazy boot environment thing worked. But thanks to Alan Jude and some others working on the menus for the BSD loader and adding boot environment support, it was perfect timing for us to jump back and use the native BSD bootloader. Also, tracking current's obviously going to give you guys much more timely feedback. So FreeBSD developers, a lot of times I know you guys are all running current, right? Especially those of you who are running it on your laptops. Well, there's been many times and instances where a PCBSD user is on 10.2 or 10.3 and you're like, I don't care about that. I'm running current on my laptop. So it's nice that we can actually help you find bugs in almost near real time. So if you've pushed something to the tree and a couple weeks later you get a bug report, it's hopefully still somewhat current and fresh in your memory and it can be taken a look at. However, in some other ways, we actually have embraced some change in TrueOS. So a big one, I forget, 6 months ago, 8 months ago, we imported LibreSSL into base, which of course a big thanks to Bernard Spill. I'm not sure, there he is. He did a lot of work to make that happen, so appreciate it. So, yeah, he did a lot of work and bled on that for us, and he's been very diligent in checking the Poudre build logs and helping us find things that tip over from time to time due to using LibreSSL. PCBSD did use LibreSSL for a couple years, but it was just on the port side of things, but now with it in base, this is great. So again, thank you very much. Another thing we've done is started importing the newer Xorg and Drm patches from the upstream work that Matt Macy's been working on. So if some of you guys have been tracking that with interest, well, that's in TrueOS by default and has been there for a few months now. So again, we really appreciate the work Matt Macy's put into that for kind of leapfrogging us up to Linux 4.7. Some other things we do is we do set a lot of different port defaults, so things that make sense for a desktop environment. There's a lot of things like Pulse Audio, for example, which I know a lot of you hate Pulse. I'm not a huge fan either, but you need it for some things, unfortunately, right? WebRTC comes to mind, so if you want to build a video conference, that's kind of the way you do it. Sorry, but we're going to try and enable those so people don't have to go compile. This one some people may not be so happy about, but we actually removed Clang and LLVM from the base not too long ago. So yeah, you're welcome. But there were some reasons behind that. So first of all, we'll go through and talk a little bit about each of these, but why LibreSSL is another thing we get asked. So of course, we've been doing this 10 plus years, a lot of security updates, and we've been bit by some of the worst offenders for security updates. And OpenSSL has unfortunately been a very high profile target. OpenBSD, you know, those guys do some really good work at culling the old cruft out of their tree, and I think they're going to apply that same vigor and enthusiasm to LibreSSL. I mean, they've already have been, which has resulted in a much smaller security footprint. It makes me really happy when I see the latest OpenSSL vulnerabilities go out for FreeBSD, and I'm like, oh, well, those didn't affect us. Like, that's kind of nice, right? So again, thanks to the OpenBSD guys for doing that. And for similar reasons, we default to OpenNTP. For the same reason. We just don't use the base system one, we use the OpenNTP from ports. So of course some folks ask, well, we couldn't put LibreSSL in the FreeBSD base because of ABI changes. Well, guess what? We don't care, we're a rolling release. So that made it a non-issue for us. So maybe it's not as applicable to FreeBSD, but for us it was pretty much not a big deal. So of course this has made it easier to pull in new versions without needing to backport specific security patches. So I think, heck, Bernard just pushed in a new version yesterday, I think. So we'll have a new LibreSSL probably next week. So again, it just makes it a lot more convenient. We're not having to go back and look at the code and figure out what those guys did and try and backport it and patch it. So what about the new DRM and KMS changes? So of course Matt Macy's done some amazing work to bulk lift us up to Linux 4.7. So currently we are using Linux 4.7, but hopefully maybe 4.8's around the corner. If you guys see Matt, you know, give him a little nudge. Maybe we can get that in here soon. That would be nice. Of course, this includes support for all the later Intel video chipsets up to and including Skylake. So if you're, you know, in the market for a new laptop, this is actually a pretty good time to do it if you're going to run TrueOS on it. If you walk around the conference, you'll see a lot of the folks from IX are running these X1 Carbons, which most of those are Skylake, which is just kind of neat to be able to see that. Something modern you can still buy at the store is working. So another one, why was Clang removed? So of course having a compiler in the base system is pretty handy, but really just isn't required for the largest percentage of our users. But you know, it saves a few megabytes from the default install, and most of our users haven't even noticed. To be honest, it has not even been an issue. However, if you're a developer, when you try and run CC, it's just going to prompt you to install LLVM 3.8 from the ports tree. So package install LLVM 3.8 and you're back in business. Our base system will automatically do all the correct things and make sure it uses the version you install from ports. So of course, what sort of port defaults do we use? So we have a long list. It would be pretty tedious to go through it all, but you can check it out later if you'd like to hit that link. Specifically, as I mentioned, we enable things like pulse support. We set some flags to enable LibreSSL for certain things. And of course, features like the SSH, OpenSSH portable, we turn on the none cipher because we have a use case for that. And there's just a lot of little things like that we've enabled. Of course, cups is enabled across the tree. And we try to enable anything that prevents a user from having to go compile something. We'd rather have too many options that you don't use rather than not enough that means I can't use what you provide. Yes?
What you just said, seems to conflict with what you just said Clang in terms of you don't need it, so you don't need it, so why bother?
Well, yes and no. So that's a pretty large one in the base, and again, most people don't need it, but we still provide it. It's not like it went away. It's in the package tree just like everything else. So if you install Clang, you're good to go. So of course, most of these things that have taken place behind the scenes, what has actually changed for desktop users? We haven't even really talked about that yet. But one of the things that's big with TrueOS is we've defaulted to our own homegrown Lumina desktop environment. That's a big shift for us. It also includes its own PCDM login manager, which includes some special features required for other projects, which I'll mention here at the end of the talk. And the old PCBSD control panel has been retired in favor of SysADM as well. So let's go ahead and talk about each of these a little bit. So first of all, people ask, why have you switched to Lumina? So for 3-4 years now, we've tried to remain desktop agnostic. So what I mean by that is we don't really have a preference what you run. You know, this was popular and has been popular, but it simply just became too costly to maintain. Many of the various FreeBSD porting teams that are porting desktop over are just burning a lot of cycles trying to keep up with Upstream, fixing breakage, trying to import the newest version, and just really spinning their wheels, not to really get anywhere new, but just to maintain current levels of functionality. So Lumina, on the other hand, was born on PCBSD, BSD license written in Qt, and it allowed us to basically spend a lot less time patching and fixing and whatnot, and actually more time adding features, which we would rather have new features than trying to just chase Linux down every rabbit trail. So since we've switched, we've actually been able to focus our limited development hours on adding a lot of new features, such as update manager support built right into the desktop, Integration with ZFS. This is actually something kind of neat. So since we only use ZFS, File Manager in Lumina is actually ZFS aware. So things like snapshots show up and you can roll back and forth and see your files as they were at a particular point in time, which is kind of cool. We've been able to go ahead and integrate it with proper utilities for display and sound and network management, all designed for and working on a native FreeBSD environment. So PCDM, for those that don't know, again, the login manager, but how has this changed for TrueOS? So for those that don't know, it's another acronym. I, for some reason, come up with a lot of acronyms, but it was the PCBSD Desktop Manager, which I think it's time to rename that. But it's our homegrown replacement for login managers such as GDM, KDM, Slim, and others. A lot of the same things apply here. We had a lot of issues where it was like, okay, KDM doesn't do this, GDM doesn't do this, and oh, it broke with this release, we need to fix stuff, and it was time to write our own. So we did that a while back. So on PCBSD and now TrueOS, we've added a lot of features for some neat things you can do on FreeBSD, like home directory encryption is kind of a cool one, which can use both Jelly and PEFs. So you have a couple different options there. We use something called Persona Crypt. But what that does with Jelly, it lets you plug in your home directory as a USB stick, which is Jelly encrypted, or PEFs actually can live on your local file system and does a layer on top of ZFS, which if you've not ever played with that, I encourage you. It's pretty neat. On TrueOS, though, we've actually improved PCDM to add a lot of new features such as high DPI support. A lot of these new X1 carbons are all 3K and needed some extra features to make them look and be visible. We've also added support for the upcoming TrueOS Pico launch, which we'll be talking about here in just a moment. So, of course, the other thing that people get asked is, well, on TrueOS, what is this sysadm utility you're talking about? So historically, if you've ever used PCBSD in the past, we used to always group our various management UIs together in something called the PCBSD control panel, and they were kind of just a group of disparate utilities, one for networking, one for, say, jail management, one for display management, etc. And they've been kind of loosely grouped together. But this has been overhauled with actually a single utility called sysadm. So it's made up of a couple components, but it actually starts with a server backend, which provides a REST and WebSockets API into your FreeBSD system. So the Qt-based client can be used to remote control other systems, of course, in addition to managing your local system, and including headless servers. So, for example, the IX QA rack we have at the Tennessee office, Joe Maloney, our QA engineer, uses sysadm to manage all those boxes, even though they're sitting in the rack there, and he has a nice GUI to take care of everything graphically and flip boot environments and do updates and whatnot. It's very, very easy. So what other things can sysadm do? Well, the other thing that's kind of cool about it is it's pretty much a single pane of glass in the sense that it's connected to multiple systems simultaneously. So he can have his one client connected to all 10 of our QA rack rigs and get notifications from them. If something's running out of disk space or whatever, we can get a single notification sent to his desktop. Communication's all done over secure WebSockets. It provides UIs for things such as task management, so a la a graphical top, if you will, where you can go and view processes and see who's using up a lot of CPU, kill things, etc. It does system updates. There's a whole App Cafe package management system. So again, if we decide we need a new package on one of the QA rigs, you can just go click a button and it gets installed, boot environments, and much more. Another thing it's able to do is import and export its configuration, which is encrypted on disk. So if you have passwords saved to log into these boxes, you don't want somebody to jack your laptop and potentially get your passwords. So we encrypt all those, and it'll prompt you for the password when you start the application. So of course, the notification manager is a big one. Since you're connected to multiple systems at a time, it is really neat to be able to have a single point of notification, letting you know when one of them has an issue that needs your attention. And the other cool thing is it's multi-platform. Because it's Qt-based, we've actually been building it for TrueOS, of course, but OS X and Windows as well. So you can grab this client and use it to drive around your FreeBSD servers or your TrueOS desktops or whatever, even if that's not your preferred laptop or desktop. So one of the things I promised I'd talk about existing PCBSD users. How are we going to handle upgrades for you guys so we don't leave you in the cold? So due to the nature of this upgrade, we decided against offering kind of the standard binary upgrade where you just go run an update thing and it updates you to TrueOS. A lot has changed. I mean, going from FreeBSD update to package base, that made it very, very tricky. So we realized that, of course, wiping the disk is not going to be an ideal situation for most, so we had to come up with another method. So the thing we came up with is on the TrueOS installation media, we now provide a mechanism we call non-destructive fresh installation. Well, that's a lot of words there. What does that mean? So basically, since PCBSD has been exclusively on ZFS for many, many years now, we were able to leverage this in some unique ways for TrueOS. Specifically, the installer backend and the Qt frontend now detect the presence of an existing zpool with boot environments. So when you first boot up, it notices, oh, I found an old installation here. If detected, it's actually going to give you a prompt and ask if you want to install into a new boot environment on your existing setup. So how does that really work? Well, what's nice is, since you're installing into a new boot environment, things like your home directories, at least on TrueOS and PCBSD anyway, those aren't included in a boot environment. So your home directories aren't touched. If you have other data sets, zvols, those are not touched in any way, shape, or form, which allows them to float between boot environments just as they normally would. This also never touches the disk or does any kind of partitioning. So if the user is going to want to repartition or change bootloaders, you still have to do some sort of destructive installation for that. But post-install, what's really cool is, since it's just installed into a fresh boot environment, all your typical administration stuff still applies. You can run the old badmin command, and you can mount, say, your old data set and copy data back and forth from your old BE to your new BE, grab the things you want. Essentially, you have a fresh install, but then you can cherry pick the things you want to bring over. So it's kind of a neat way, especially if you've managed to get yourself into a sideways situation. You can do a fresh installation without having to go find something to back up your data and move it back when you're done. You can just install right on the same disk again. So this also gives us something neat we can do, kind of a try before you buy approach. Again, since nothing's actually being destroyed, you have the option to try it before you buy it. And you could even go backwards in time too. So you could install an older TrueOS if you have a newer install if you want to go back for some reason. Until the old BE is destroyed, I mean, you can revert at any point in time. So you know, that's fully in your control now. Okay, so these are all the features on TrueOS available right now. So if you go download TrueOS, everything I've talked about you have access to. So of course, what do we have cooking in the lab, we always get asked, because it seems like we're always coming up with something new to work on. So we actually have a couple different things about to emerge from the workshop. So first of all, we're looking at a replacement init system, well, run control anyway, and something we're calling True Os Pico, which I'll be happy to introduce here in a moment. So first of all, of course, a new init system. Oh my gosh, you guys haven't gone nuts and brought systemd in, have you? Please, please, no, don't panic. After evaluating many options, we actually felt the best way forward was using OpenRC, which for those who aren't familiar with that, it has a pedigree of starting by a NetBSD developer. It's been around for many years now. It's in production on things like Gen 2 and whatnot. So it found its way into the Linux community for a while, but we want to bring it back to its true BSD home, especially because it's BSD 2-clause licensed. Come on, we need to give this a home somewhere in the BSDs. But specifically, we get asked, why do you want a new init or RC system? Well, it's something that's come up a lot in recent years. If you've come to BSD cans, people have been having discussions about init systems and whatnot, so we know there's a need there and a desire. From a PCBSD perspective, we've found the legacy init, or run control, to be a bit limiting and pretty cumbersome at times. In particular with laptop use though, especially without suspend or zoom, it seems like we're always shutting down and booting back up. So a boot time of 60+ seconds really is a buzzkill. Like, let's be honest, we don't have suspend or zoom, so it'd be nice if the laptop started faster. In particular, even this one, a nice new i7, still takes 1 minute and 20 seconds to boot with Wi-Fi. So of course, why OpenRC? Well, the 2-clause BSD license, I mean, hey, that fits the bill perfectly for us. It's still in active development. This has not been abandoned in any way. People are still actively adding features to it. It originates from a NetBSD developer, Roy Marples. Doesn't require reinventing the wheel for us in many ways. Also doesn't require us replacing SBIN init as PID1, which was kind of important to us. We didn't want to take that on just yet. Maybe down the road we will. It does have a init replacement you can use, but the beauty of it is we don't have to make that shift right away. So far the results have been pretty promising. We've actually integrated directly into our FreeBSD base tree. We took out all the yucky gmake that crept in from the Gen 2 guys screwing around with it. So that's all finally gone. Thank goodness. That took a while to get done. Boot times, though, are showing dramatic improvement. So I've been screwing around with it here on my laptop, and going from 1 minute and 20-second boot down to 22-second boot is a significant improvement. It's to the point now where we're looking more at, like, how can we speed up the kernel in it versus the RC system, because the RC system's pretty darn fast. It also allows us to do some neat things like using WPA supplicant, DHCP, CD, and others from ports. We don't have to use the ones in the base if we don't want to, and you could potentially toggle things on and off and try different ones out if you'd like. And of course, work is ongoing to provide OpenRC service scripts via our ports and packages. So one of the beauties of it is, since we're not necessarily reinventing the wheel here, Gen2's been using it for a long time. There's I don't know how many thousands of service scripts already written for things from VirtualBox to OpenVPN and so forth and so on, and we can just pretty much bulk import those into our package system. Again, like I said, the results have been very, very promising. Oh, the other thing I got to mention is we replaced the service command with its service command, and the usage is pretty much identical. Matter of fact, so much so we have a lot of utilities that depend on the service command, and we didn't have to make a single change to support this. It just worked. Perfect drop-in replacement. And it should be coming out soon. We're actually going to try and push this out in our next round of package updates, which I'm hopeful will be sometime, probably late next week, maybe the week after, depending on how much we can get done when we get back home. Joe Maloney, actually in the QA department at IX, he's been spearheading the effort, spending a lot of his spare time on trying to figure out how to make Init work, and he's most likely going to give some talks about it in 2017 as well. I think those will be good to hear. So again, a 60 to 80 second boot time is closer to 20 seconds now. That makes me a little more forgiving for the fact that we don't have proper suspend resume working. So that's at least more tolerable. So of course now the TrueOS Pico, what is this thing we've been talking about? We've hinted at it on the mailing list and we've had some discussions about it elsewhere. But the short version, it's basically an ARM version of TrueOS, specifically designed to operate as a thin client extension. The long version, or I guess reality, I've been struggling to find a good use for all these Raspberry Pi 2 devices, which have been sitting on my desk for a couple of years now. Like, I gotta do something with these, you know. Did a little router for a while, it was fine. But so how does the Pico work, you may ask? So it's split into two parts. So we have the Pico server, which can be a TrueOS desktop, or it could be a headless server, it doesn't have to be running X. And then of course you have the ARM image, which you'll deploy on the Raspberry Pi 2. The server operates as, of course, an MDNS advertiser, and clients will then bring up MDNS and search for a server. Once the server is located, the client and server are going to do some REST chatter back and forth. SSH keys are going to be created automatically, and then ultimately an SSH X11 forwarding session is going to be started. So on the server side, what this basically looks like is package install Pico server. Not too hard so far. And oh, you just start it. And that's it. It's zero config at the moment. We're not requiring you to set up anything. So on the client side, it's basically fetch the image, decompress it. I think we decompress it at the moment, DD it, and then plug and play. Zero config again. So once that's all said and done, you are ready to rock and roll. So how does it really work? Well, on the server side, we have an INI file, which lets you set a bunch of configuration knobs. And before you knock it, it's written in Go, and INI was pretty easy to use, and I like it, but we may switch that down the road. Of course, as I mentioned, the client is a zero config setup. There's absolutely zero config files on the client, so you can DD it, blow it away, swap out the SD cards, toss it if it breaks or whatever. You're not losing anything. After you make changes on the server side, however, you can kick the clients to force a reboot, which will then, of course, reboot it up, perform a reconfiguration of the session. So if you need to change some knobs or whatever, just restarting the client's enough to push those down. So what sort of features do we support? So at the moment, we have some optional things which you can turn on. So of course, we have some SSH tuning options. The defaults I've found work pretty well. We've set compression on. We use AES enabled Cypher. So you can mess around with that if you want to see if you can get better performance out of it. No problem. We also have support for audio, so you can enable or disable that. So basically your clients, when you start playing a video on Firefox, you get sound out of your local system and not on the host. So that's fun. Another one is we've enabled, and you have an option to enable and disable virtual GL. Does anybody here know what virtual GL is? No? Couple? All right. Virtual GL is basically a way for you to use the host system's GPU to render graphics. So for example, being able to play Minecraft would be kind of cool. Maybe you don't have the horsepower on your little ARM board, but you can use that heavy NVIDIA card you have on the server, and then it can share the GPU with all the other clients. So now everyone can play Minecraft simultaneously, and it streams it over to the client, which is only using 2D rendering to display it on the screen. So basically, if you've heard of Steam Link, similar in principle. So why would you want one? Inexpensive. I don't know if you guys have checked the prices. Oh, what? Oh, you had a question?
Oh, I was going to say, is the backhaul on that based around NX?
No, it's not using NX in any way.
Okay, so how does that actually pull it across? Like the imaging before it all?
For virtual GL specifically, or just for the desktop?
That client holds things.
So the whole thing is SSH with X11 forwarding is how it works. Yeah, yep. So of course, what was that? So the 20-second boot time or whatever is for the laptops, things actually running TrueOS. That has nothing to do with the Pico server. SSD on this one, yes. Yeah. So. Yes.
You said earlier that all the big information for is stored, all the configuration in general is stored in your own database, but that you also mentioned here that stuff is private server, big file, big file, or is that actually going to be moved to the database?
So no. So the config for the Picos all lives on the server side. So the clients just pull that down dynamically when they connect.
No, I understand it.
Yeah.
Earlier, I thought you said that for the TrueOS big information, that it was all listed in database anyway, and it was regenerated.
No, that's more of a FreeNAS thing. Ours doesn't use a database system. Sorry. No problem. So of course, why would you want a Pico thin client? Well, obviously it's cheap. I don't know if you guys have seen the prices, but you can get a Raspberry Pi for $35 or more, and then you can get things like Banana Pis for $70. That's pretty inexpensive. So of course, less systems to manage is always a good thing. And of course, you can log into any user account from any client now. So you can go sit down at any desk and start working. I have a lot of kids. If you don't know, this actually kind of appeals to me. I have 5 kids at the moment, and they all have their own desktops, and it's getting a little old having to go work on each of their desktops individually and fix them and do things, and this just seems like a really attractive option. And little secret is all they care about is playing Minecraft. So as long as I can get that working, we're in good shape. So people ask, how's the performance of the Raspberry Pi 2? Well, to be honest, it's a little borderline, maybe acceptable for light desktop computing, but there's a couple limiting factors we'll talk about, but it's good for basic email, web browsing, that kind of thing. Where the system struggles, though, is with a lot of changing pixels. In particular, this is due to a couple things. Partially due to the CPU usage. The SCFB driver is not really optimized to do full screen video and whatnot, so not a good situation there. And also partially due to the fact that you're using a USB 2 100 megabit NIC on the Raspberry Pi 2. Thin client really should be running over a gigabit. But aside from that, it does work, and yes, you can play Minecraft on it. Just do it in a smaller window where the bandwidth doesn't get too crazy, and it's not trying to render too many pixels at once, and it's actually a solid 30 frames a second. So I just still want to be able to blow it up full screen because I know my kids will complain. So what can be done to improve it, of course? Well, moving to a faster platform will definitely help on the Pico side. So the Raspberry Pi 3 does look attractive, but we believe it's still going to run out of gas with full screen workloads, in particular, mostly related to the network. It's still the USB 2 100 megabit NIC. So I think that's still going to be a limiting factor even if we fix the CPU rendering of the video. The Banana Pi M3 is actually the one that is looking really attractive to me at the moment. It looks like it may be a good reference device. It has a dedicated 1 gigabyte NIC on it. It actually has a Realtek NIC, not driven over the USB. So I think that may be the best option going forward. Yeah, Corey.
I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
One, you said the auto zero-touch config is done via MDNS, right?
MDNS is just used for the discovery of the server, and then after that it's a REST server which does a bunch of back and forth.
Is it possible to override that? Because I don't know if
Sure. Yeah, so the plan is to allow you to set up an option where you can say, actually, here's the IP of my server. So you don't have to use MDNS if you don't want to. I figure some people will want to, but we'd rather get all the zero conf stuff working first, so we target that.
And when you're, say you have an employee that needs to run Windows VM,
Sure.
what is how do you help the
So an employee needs to run a Windows VM, for example. So we've actually been using VirtualBox on TrueOS for a while now, and that works over the Pico just like it's natively connected. You can bring up your Windows VM there, and it's just sending the X pixels over the network. So yeah, you can still definitely use it.
There's also actually there's a couple forms I got to maybe there's a test line of this.
Okay,
I have one of the NVIDIA Jetson
sure.
and I have a Xbox i4 Pro.
Okay.
I think either of those maybe do that because I'm sure both of them have data mix. And the NVIDIA I have is one has
Well, The plan is to make these available for a whole variety of ARM boards. So my plan is once FreeBSD gains proper frame buffer device support and sound support for devices, we'll just start rolling an image of it and see which one works best. So give people in the community a chance to play with a variety of them. So of course, another thing we're looking to do to improve it is maybe porting over the FB Turbo driver from Linux, which is basically an accelerated / non-accelerated driver. It's still software rendering, but it does some ARM tricks to speed it up in some ways so you get good 2D rendering performance, which really that's all we care about in this instance because all the 3D rendering takes place on the server. So of course, with so much going on, we've been asked, so where do you guys need help? It sounds like you guys got your hands full. So of course, projects like this, we always need help. So we just tell people everywhere. In particular though, if you need some specifics, kernel and device drivers, we're talking for the ARM boards. If you want to help there, that would be great. If you want to help with Matt Macy's work to get more video stuff fixed, perfect. Take your pick. So just put your stuff in current and we'll grab it. We'll be happy to steal from you guys, no problem. So of course, patching ports for current is a big one. So we're actually bleeding on this one a little bit right now, which I'm happy to do because I like fixing ports. So we are noticing pretty quickly when something breaks on current now. If you guys in particular will be receptive to receiving patches, I'll be happy to send stuff upstream and get that all put in. And of course, testing, or better yet, if you can send bug fixes in, that would be much appreciated. So I've pretty much asked all the questions, so any other questions you guys have? Yes?
You said at the beginning that you automatically detect ABI breakage.
Yes.
How do you do that?
So we just look at the FreeBSD version that's been set. Oh, he was asking how do we detect ABI breakage when we pull in a new set of packages from upstream. So when we resync with current, we make sure that the FreeBSD version is being updated, and if the ABI, if we notice that number has been bumped, then we detect that as a breakage.
What about accidental ABI?
Well, since we test internally beforehand, we have seen that happen a couple times, and then I will manually go bump the version myself. So we test it all beforehand because you just don't know, something like that could happen. There's no automated stuff that pushes this out to the public. We actually use it in the Tennessee office for a week on average before we push it out. So we've been pretty good about detecting like an accidental ABI breakage because usually someone screams at me pretty quick like, LibreOffice stopped working, or something like that will happen. So, yes? The question was, do the package tools still work as usual? Yeah, so we haven't really modified PKG in any significant way. So anything you're used to doing on FreeBSD, you can happily do on TrueOS. The only exception to that would be we've put a sanity checker in there again to detect if you need to do an upgrade before you pull in something from remote, which may have a newer ABI. So, any other questions? Yes?
For more conservative environments where head is out of the question, can some of this wizardry be used on just off-the-shelf FreeBSD?
Yeah, so the question was if somebody doesn't want to run current, could they use some of this cool stuff on a release, for example? So yes and no. So we're not necessarily rolling release images, but there's nothing stopping you from doing that and then pulling our tools in. So our entire build system actually revolves around turning everything into ports. So any of our utilities from sysadm to life preserver to you name it, they all have a make port script in there which you can run, point it at your ports tree, and it turns it into a port, which then you can Poudre build and suck in the latest. Matter of fact, I've been a little lazy. I've been promising to push this upstream into FreeBSD, but other things keep coming up and I keep forgetting to do it. So somebody ping me and remind me to do that here in about a week, and I'll see if I can push more of these upstream so you guys can just build it out of your ports tree as well. Any other questions? Yes? Yeah, so the question was about OpenRC, have we tried parallel boots? So actually, Joe just showed me that working here a couple days ago. He got it working while he was out here, and it seems to work. So a couple rough edges he had to sand off, but so far it's looking really good. Yeah, Joe, what were you going to say about that? Okay, so it's not a huge speed difference, but at least it's supported, so maybe it'll help more down the road. Yeah, Pavel? Yeah, so the question was, can you use full disk encryption for TrueOS? And yes. So in the installer, you have an option to do full disk jelly encryption, and that is supported. It uses the new work Alan Jude's done to add jelly encryption to the bootloader, so you can unlock at boot time. The only exception is it's not supported on UEFI yet. I think, was it Eric McCorkle, or I forget the person's name now, forgive me, who's working on some UEFI bootloader stuff. I think there's a patch upcoming which is going to add that as well. Okay. Oh, Yes?
If the server running the X clients were a vanilla FreeBSD 11 server, do you have to do anything there to make the remote audio work so you can hear the audio through this?
So the question was, if you're running vanilla FreeBSD and you install Pico server, does remote audio work? No, you don't really have to do much to make it work. We have some hooks into our login manager PCDM to enable things like audio though, so you'd most likely have to bring that over as well. I should have mentioned, we actually did make a whole slew of changes to the PCDM login manager and then the Lumina itself, so they're both aware of the idea of Pico clients now. So they'd set specific things like, oh, I have virtual GL, we have some variables we need to set. Oh, I have remote audio, I need to redirect audio here. So there are some hooks there you'll probably need to bring over as well. Yeah, Corey.
Are there any plans for able to connect with the online with
The question was, I think the Pico, is there any plans to do like Pixie booting? At the moment, no. I'm trying to keep this as simple as possible, and I feel like 2 gigabyte SD cards are super dirt cheap, so I don't know if we need to do Pixie booting at the moment. We tried that years ago, and it just added so much complexity that people complained. There's just a lot of extra networking stuff you got to do, right? So I feel like this is an acceptable alternative. Yeah, George.
So where do we actually find the information on Pico as opposed to TrueOS?
So the question was, where do you find Pico info versus TrueOS? It's going to be up on the TrueOS website actually here in the next couple days. We just launched a new website for TrueOS, I think, while we were here. So we're still putting some info up there, and actually I'm going to push, we have what I'm calling a preview release of the Pico images that are functional, do the virtual GL and sound and all that. Those are ready to go. I just need to go home and get them pushed out and make sure the website's up to date. So check back in about a week and you can start playing with them and have some fun with that. Okay, folks. Well, oh, yes.
PCBSD door shut down and door on, the start of it was the latest version. Is it designed like that or is it a bug?
The question was, is it a bug that when you shut things down, it's the old version, then when you, and then when you boot up, it's the new version?
Down, just turn it on, then turn on. The start of it was the latest version.
Mm-hmm.
Is it designed like that?
Yeah, on PCBSD it was designed to do automatic updates like that, where when you would shut down the new...
I'm talking about upgrades.
Oh, upgrades. No, it's not going to do... Yeah, it's not going to do that.
I don't care about
Yeah.
upgrade.
It's not going to automatically do upgrades on you like that. So for PCBSD, we're not really pushing, there's not an 11.0 of it, so you're not going to see your 10.3 magically become 11.0 or TrueOS overnight. So you'll have to manually go grab that. Yeah. Okay, well thank you folks, I appreciate it, and thanks for staying awake. I know it's hot in here and lunch is making me tired too. So thanks everyone.